What do people fear? The dark, the unknown, the capability of what horrors and tragedies us humans are capable of. Horror looks all around us and can strike at any time. Well, we're on the internet here, and there's nothing scarier than an unpopular opinion. And what's my unpopular opinion? I don't like the Nintendo 64. But ZMan, you're a huge Nintendo fan. You should love the Nintendo 64. Well, let me tell you something. You don't have to love every CD a band puts out, nor do you have to love every game in a series. Just saying, Super Mario Sunshine, pretty freaking whack. Nor do you have to love every console a publisher puts out. And well, I just wasn't a big fan of the 64. And why is that? I know a lot of you out there grew up with the 64 gaming on titles like Super Mario 64, Mario Party, Mario Golf, and what have you. But for me, I just, couldn't get into it. And well, let me explain why. A bit of background on me. I grew up with the Sega Genesis. That was my exposure to the wacky world of video games. After that, I got a PlayStation and a Dreamcast not long after the Dreamcast launched. I didn't own any Nintendo system until I got the GameCube, and the only reason why I even got one of those was for Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. Not to say I didn't have any exposure to the N64 during my early years. I remember playing a bit of GoldenEye with some friends, and that game was pretty awesome. I played a bit of Banjo-Tooie and not liking it at all. It wasn't until my last year of elementary school when I even played Ocarina of Time, and that was only Master Quest, so as you can understand, I don't have much nostalgia for the system. In terms of style, not too big on the Nintendo 64's look. I always thought it looked kind of, ugly. Not to say I'm winning any awards in the fan service department, but, Thankfully, alternate colors do exist. I had the blue one from a Craigslist deal, but I had to sell it. The green one, though, I think that one's the coolest looking one, and, it's not as expensive as I thought it would be. At least the controllers come in different colors, and that was the perfect segue to my least favorite part of the Nintendo 64, the controller. This controller is garbage! The analog stick is so stiff and is prone to breaking. And why are there 3 handles? Damn it, Nintendo, it isn't that hard. Thankfully, most games didn't use the analog stick and the directional pad and the face buttons for one title. That would be, too stupid. Still, lacking access to all the buttons at any given moment seems a bit of an oversight. I do need to give credit to the controller for being the first mainstream analog stick, predating the DualShock and the Saturn 3D pad. And unpopular opinion, I like the 3D pad for the Saturn. I also like the expansion slot on the back of the controller. Granted, anything more than the memory card throws off the weight of the controller, but it is a nifty idea. It might have been the inspiration for the Dreamcast and the VMU. And we all know I love the Dreamcast and the VMU. Controller aside, what about the games? In total, the Nintendo 64 had a grand total of 388 games released. 296 of those releasing in North America. For comparison, the Sega Saturn had around 600 games released for it, and the PlayStation had over 1,000 games for it, worldwide, of course. Nintendo's approach was quality over quantity, and to be fair, the games that Nintendo put out were amazing. Super Mario 64 defined 3D platformers. Ocarina of Time is often regarded as the best Legend of Zelda game, and Majora's Mask isn't far behind. These games are credited for invented 3D targeting in games, which is still used to this very day. Star Fox 64 is the only good Star Fox game. F-Zero X kicks so much ass, you might go blind. Same with the Japanese exclusive Sin and Punishment. Even games I personally don't enjoy, like Pokemon Stadium, Mario Party, and Banjo-Kazooie, are games that many hold in high regard. Unfortunately for this video, I borrowed my friend's Nintendo 64, and he only has Banjo-Tooie. This is horror. This is true horror. Stuck on a system with one game you don't even like. You see, the real game when you play these retro game consoles is seeing if the thing works. And my friend's N64 doesn't work. I didn't break it. Wasn't me. Wasn't me. Then we get outside the comfort zone of Nintendo first-party games, and don't worry, there are some solid third-party titles here. Titles like Mischief Maker, Snowboard Kids, Jet Force Gemini, Goemon, and that Tigger's Honey Hunt game are all awesome. Yes, really, don't hate. That Pooh game was really fun. Some of the unique sports titles and driving games like NBA Hang Time, NFL Blitz, Extreme G, and that Beetle Racing game are worth checking out, and not to mention the excellent wrestling games that Arika developed are really fun to this day. And I am sure there are a few hidden gems on the Nintendo 64 I'm missing. But when I look at the library on the whole, there is a lot of games on there that are either sports games that no one cares about, racing games that I've never played, and licensed garbage that clutter up your local game store. Granted, this is par for the course on any system. The problem for me at least is that two of my favorite genres, fighting games and the JRPG, are totally scarce on the system. Multi-platform games like Spider-Man, Rayman 2, and the Tony Hawk games suffered on the Nintendo 64, either due to hardware limitations or having to map the controls to a very awkward controller. Mega Man Legends was already kind of awkward on the PlayStation. Can't imagine it being any better on Mega Man 64. A constant issue for the 64 was the amount of games planned for the system but never saw the light of day. The 64 was a notoriously difficult system to develop for. Just ask the guys at Rare how they made Banjo-Kazooie work. Nintendo had plans for a new Metroid, a new Fire Emblem, a sequel to Super Mario 64, and the big one of Mother 3 for the 64, but none of them saw release on the 64. Some had to be canned due to technical issues, others got canned due to the failure of the Nintendo 64 disk drive. It was an add-on that bombed in Japan and screwed over many plans for the system's games. The Nintendo 64 disk drive is worth doing its own video on, as it's such a fascinating disaster. Other games like Freak Boy and Robotech Crystal Dreams collapsed and faded into obscurity. This, combined with the general lack of third-party support for the 64, led to the 64 having a very weak library overall compared to its competitors. And that's why I'm not too keen on the system these days. I just find the system light on games that hold my interest. Despite my criticisms, the Nintendo 64 was an important system for games and for Nintendo. As stated earlier, Nintendo nailed full-range 3D games with Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. First-person shooters like Doom 64 and GoldenEye proved that consoles could do first-person shooters at a time when they were regulated to PC only. Nintendo started several franchises here like Pokemon Stadium, Mario Party, Animal Crossing in Japan, 1080 Snowboarding, Rave Race, the woefully overlooked Custom Robo, and the phenomenal Sin and Punishment, a series that really needs a new game. Come on, Treasure and Nintendo, let's get the pace up. All got their start here. Rare knocked it out of the park with several heavy hitters like the Banjo games, Perfect Dark, GoldenEye, Conquer, and Donkey Kong 64. Granted, I think that last game is whack as all hell, but other gamers seem to enjoy it well enough. Above all else, the Nintendo 64's defining feature is local multiplayer. 4 controller slots right on the front of the console, and a lot of the best games on the system made damn sure to use them. I guarantee you, right now, as you watch this video, there are some group of friends still gaming on GoldenEye, Mario Kart 64, Mario Golf, the wretched cursed game of Mario Party, and of course, Super Smash Bros. In fact, I think I read an article about it that there are some people still playing GoldenEye in their dorm room. As for Nintendo, I see the 64 being the place where a lot of long-standing issues with consoles started for Nintendo. Nintendo made a system that was structurally different from other systems, and the idea of using cartridges seemed like a good idea to curb piracy, but in hindsight, it just made the 64 too difficult to program for. Many third parties, including longtime partner Square, had to abandon the system due to the 64's limitations. Nintendo had a hard time keeping third parties interested in the 64, and that was an issue they had with the GameCube and definitely the Wii U. Nintendo definitely recovered third-party support with the Wii and the Switch, but during the 64, it was pretty dry. The system was ripe with delays. Being released after the PlayStation and Saturn didn't help its case, nor did its weak release lineup of Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wing 64, and nothing else for a few months. Nintendo's consoles since then have always had problems with their launches, see the 3DS and its insanely weak launch. Nintendo eventually learned their lesson with release scheduling by the time the Switch rolled out. On the whole, the 64 is a curious system to look at these days. It's fascinating to see how Nintendo's greats made the transition to 3D, and how developers worked around the limitations of the 64. It was that time in history where companies were making the jump to 3D, and it's fun seeing how some of the early 3D games played. And in my eyes, the PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and the 64 is the last really unique console generation. The Nintendo 64's heavy hitters knock it out of the park to this very day, but for my taste, I'll just stick to exploring these Saturns or the PlayStation's libraries. Nostalgia is a very powerful thing. We're all adults now. We all have stuff to take care of, families to feed, jobs to work. And it's nice to have something that you can go back to, play for a little bit, and escape your reality, if even for an hour. And whether you're gaming on Ocarina of Time for the 64, Gran Turismo 2 for the PlayStation, or Burning Rangers for the Sega Saturn, we're all gamers, and we all have different experiences, and that doesn't discredit each other's experiences. Yeah, I was trying to sound smart there, but I really should script these. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell as well so you get notified whenever I release a new video every Wednesday, early o'clock in the States. And yeah, I'll see you next week for a new episode of the ZMan Show. Also, man, I really need to get the haircut. It's taking over. It's consuming me.